It had been 4 years since my wife had died and 3 years since my children had started urging me to move. They thought the family home, where they had all grown up, was too big for a single man. I resisted as long as I could, but eventually realized they were right. I didn't want to live with any of my children, nor did they need me. As I got older, I became more irritable. I was fine most of the time, but I developed a short temper and couldn't stand people who acted foolishly. After being nice to people I didn't like for years just to be polite, it no longer mattered to me. After my kids and I finally agreed, I started preparing to move. The hardest part was getting rid of my stuff. You'd be surprised how much junk one can collect over a lifetime, especially if they've lived in the same house for years. I was a bit sad that I couldn't give more stuff to my kids. My son John, a lawyer, took my tools, and my daughter Lisa, a doctor, took her mother's china. She was going to keep it for her daughter. Emily, a teacher and the oldest, took a grandfather clock that belonged to my father. I think they each took something so I wouldn't feel bad. I had yard sales every other week during the summer, and eventually a used furniture dealer came and bid on what was left. It was sad to see my whole life go without a word. I felt a bit down and angry. I wasn't mad at my kids because they did the right thing. I was angry at myself for getting old. Maplewood Village required a fee. The money from selling the family home covered that. I didn't have much left because I chose a studio apartment. It had one room and a bathroom. The kitchen had a small area for a coffee pot and microwave, but no stove. I wasn't going to cook much since meals were included in the high monthly fee. There was also a small fridge under the counter, perfect for my beers. The room was mostly taken up by a full-size bed. The kids surprised me with a new HD TV and a leather chair. What more could a man want? A computer would have been nice, but there were several computers with internet access in the common area. It didn't take long to get used to the daily routine. Since I always got up early, I could take my morning walk without being disturbed. Usually, I saw a lone woman during my walk. She smiled, but avoided eye contact. I'd seen her a few times in the main building, but didn't know her name. She always wore stylish suits. Her hair was shoulder-length and silky, like in a shampoo commercial. It was mixed silver and gray. I was impressed she was confident enough to keep it natural. Most women dye their hair ridiculous colors to look younger. The minimum age to enter this place was 65, so it seemed silly to me. I never understood vanity. Eventually, I learned her name was Grace. Grace was married to Henry Barton, a retired Air Force colonel. The Bartons lived in the largest unit in the entire complex, and he flaunted that fact every chance he got. Just looking at him made my blood boil. He was the epitome of arrogance, and I lost my temper every time I got near him. As far as I was concerned, Grace was a beautiful woman, and her husband treated her like a servant. He didn't abuse her, but he took her for granted and always spoke to her in a mean way. If I had said any of the things he said to my late wife, Anne, I would have deserved a cast-iron skillet to the head. The ratio of single women to single men in communities like Maplewood was very unbalanced. As soon as a man was available, the women would gather around him. These women were not vultures by any standard, just lonely widows hoping for some attention. I was fortunate enough to have a wonderful companion at every meal. Getting them to talk about other women was easy. Unfortunately, I had to learn a lot about the women I didn't care for to learn a little about Grace. Henry loved to brag. He was always ready to talk about his brilliant military career, his great athletic skills, and his collection of memorabilia. After spending a few hours on the computer, I discovered that he was not an Air Force colonel, but a lieutenant colonel in the reserve. After 20 years of service, he received a free promotion to colonel, but never reached that rank. He was never in combat and spent his entire career as a supply officer. Please understand that I am not demeaning his position or service, but questioning the way he presented himself. If you listen to Henry, you would soon believe he single-handedly won the Vietnam War. I had no trouble getting Henry to show me his amazing collection of expensive junk. He had an entire room filled with display cases and shelves. I saw a Mickey Mantle baseball card, an autographed O.J., Simpson football, and 100 other sports collectibles. A beautifully framed engraving of Whistler hung on the wall. A lithograph by Peter Max was off to the side. 2 albums held pages of autographs and signed photographs. He was obsessed with his possessions and bragged about each one. Grace sat quietly with her book while Henry guided me through the apartment. The most interesting thing I noticed was the double beds. Several weeks passed. Grace and I still walked every morning, but never together. There was never a nod of acknowledgement between us. My relationship with the women at the estate steadily improved, and I used this time to improve my social skills. I also spent a lot of time observing and studying Henry. He was an excellent tennis player and almost a pro at golf. We went bowling one evening as a large group, and I was amazed at his talents. I looked for a weakness to get closer to Grace, but I didn't find one. Evening time at Maplewood stretched slowly. Most of the residents watched TV or a movie. There were usually a few card games going on, and some ladies played mahjong, which I never understood. Henry enjoyed cribbage and, to my surprise, parcheesi. Anne and I spent many quiet evenings hunched over the parcheesi game board. I never realized how strategic the game was until my wife beat me over and over again. It took years before I could get over her. On 2 occasions, I got so angry that I ripped a parcheesi board in half and threw it across the room. The next day, I would bring home a new one and apologize to Anne for being a fool. After the kids went home, we stopped playing for some reason I don't remember. The only thing I took with me of value was my first edition of Mickey Spillane's The Big Kill. It didn't cost much, but I kept it because I bought it new, and it was one of the few books I actually enjoyed reading. The grammar was terrible, and it was obvious they didn't have proofreaders in those days. It's amazing how many books he sold considering that. After 30 minutes on the computer, I found several autographs of my favorite author for sale. I printed out 3 of them and spent the rest of the evening practicing my forgery skills. I'd never been very good at it, but Henry couldn't know that. Now I had a signed first edition that had to be worth something. The first thing I did was mention and show off my new jewel to a few buddies who were hanging around Henry. He didn't approach me right away. "Walter, I understand you have a first edition of a Mike Hammer novel. Can I take a look at it?" I didn't say anything to the other guys about the signature on the cover of the book, but I made sure they saw it. "It would be my pleasure. Henry, I've had the book for over 40 years, and it is my pride and joy." Henry spent a good 5 minutes looking at the book. He checked to see if the spine was secure and read the publisher's information on the front. Too bad he didn't know more about forged signatures. "That's a great piece. Walt, would you mind parting with it?" "Well, Henry, I don't need the money, but I might be interested in a trade or something. Why don't you think about it, and maybe you can think of something to entertain me?" I knew I had brought that book with me for some reason. It wasn't the best reason, but it did bring some excitement to a dull existence. Over the next few days, Henry tried to engage me in various activities at which he excelled. He tried betting, but never said exactly what he was going to offer. I was more interested in games than sports. Poker was his first choice, but I still didn't respond. I was waiting for parcheesi. It didn't matter because I was planning on losing anyway. I just felt like I could put on a more convincing show in something I was good at. The day came when he proposed, and I reluctantly accepted. By this time, many residents had learned of the bet. I didn't want an audience, so I agreed to one observer to clarify or witness the terms of the wager, but not to watch the game. The big day came, and Henry was annoyingly confident. He had no doubt that he would beat me, and he was already showing off. We sat down at a secluded table in the common area and went over the rules of the game. "Mr. Barton, I'm putting my first edition of a Mickey Spillane novel on the line. What are you offering?" "Mr. Graham, I've made you several offers over the past few weeks, but you've rejected them all. I assume you have something in mind, so I'll have to hear what it is and then make a decision." It seemed to me that we were beginning to address each other formally. It gave the wager a certain ceremonial air. "I'm willing to bet my book against one evening with your wife, Grace." This got a reaction from my opponent. Not a violent one, but a surprised one. Without saying a word, he expressed amazement at my boldness. Henry's friend, who sat with us to clarify the terms of the bet, was also a bit shocked. "That's just ridiculous. You don't seriously think I'd bet my wife against a silly book, do you? Charlie, would you mind leaving Mr. Barton and me alone to discuss this like gentlemen?" Charlie stood up and walked out, getting a nod from Henry. He walked across the room and was soon deep in conversation with the gathered group of watchers. My plan had worked perfectly. "I didn't mean to upset you like this, Henry. What I'm proposing is innocent enough. All I want to do is invite Grace to dinner without all the fuss and commitment. I'm going crazy in this place, and I need to get out for the evening. I've had dinner with every lady in this complex except Grace. She's the only one who can make it special for me. Just dinner, that's all? I promise, and I'll even let her pick the restaurant. Of course, you'll have to approve it and make sure she's okay with it. That's not a problem. She'll do whatever I tell her to do. When he made that statement, I realized I was doing the right thing. He didn't care about her. She was just another piece of property to him. Henry looked at Charlie and gave him a thumbs up. We were ready to start the game. Did you ever play a game as a kid where one person whispered a statement to another person, and then it was passed down one by one to 10 or 20 people? By the time it got to the end, it was quite different than when it started. I was sure that the terms of our wager would come back to Grace in the same way. Now all I had to do was wait for the results. I could win or lose, but at least I had a chance. The game went as expected. Barton was good, but not that good. I had 2 opportunities to block and get to the finish line, but I missed both. I was able to offer him the same situation, but he didn't even see it. We played twice as long as we should have. After the win, I handed him the book and congratulated him on a good game. The seed had been planted. I had a good night's sleep that night. The morning was beautiful, and I never felt better as I started my walk. Before I knew it, a furious Grace Barton was blocking my path with her hands on her hips. "Who the hell do you think you are, embarrassing me like this?" "I'm sorry, but this wasn't part of my plans." "Did you really think I would agree to have sex with you just because my stupid husband lost a bet?" The rumor chain worked just as I'd hoped. He said you'd do whatever he told you to do. That definitely threw the demure woman off balance. I wouldn't make up anything like that. I couldn't tell her I'd taken it out of context when poor Henry said it. He was talking about dinner, not sex. It was to my advantage to make her think what she thought. Why would you bet such a valuable book on something you could never get? I'd put everything I have on the line to spend the evening with you. It wasn't hard. She was still furious, but seemed to be deep in thought. Turning to leave, she made a low, growling sound. "Don't ever humiliate me like that again, you arrogant twerp." As Grace Barton walked away, I wondered why she used the initial sob instead of just saying, "son of a bitch." I finally met the new woman of my dreams. Mildred Thompson became my companion for breakfast. She wasn't as talkative as usual, and an amused smile shone on her face for most of the meal. "You have something on your mind, Mildred. What is it?" She leaned across the table and chuckled lightly. "Walter, were you really going to do that if you won the game? Were you going to have sex with her? Shame on you." "Why would you ask me that?" "We all had our fingers crossed. We were rooting for you to win." "Why?" "We thought it would be good for her. She needs some attention." "I think you're a bunch of dirty old women." I smiled broadly when I said that. "Besides, a gentleman never tells." I grabbed the last triangle of toast and winked at Mildred as I left the table. It was nice to have the ladies support my campaign. As I left, Mildred was beaming from ear to ear. She now had enough information to monopolize the conversation in Maplewood all day. I hardly saw Henry that morning. I skipped lunch and took the shuttle bus to Walmart. I had a few things to buy, and I was trying to avoid more questioning as I had with Mildred earlier. Everything was fine now, but it would be easy to mess up. I made dinner on the TV and watched a couple of movies in my room before going to bed. It was already 11 when I heard a faint knock on the door. Standing in the doorway was Grace Barton with a concerned expression on her face. I stepped aside and let her enter, standing in just my boxer briefs. The only light in the room came from the hallway and the red glow of the clock. I closed the door just as she threw off her robe and climbed into my bed. Not a word was spoken between us. At 3 in the morning, the light from the hallway hit my eyes again. My overnight guest had left as quietly as she had come. The 4 short hours we had spent together had been glorious, and the fact that we didn't say anything the entire time made them even better. I slept through breakfast and was surprised by a visit from my 3 ladies with Danish, juice, and hot coffee. They didn't say anything either, just smiled. I was still in my boxers. No one talked about my relationship with Grace. She visited me at least twice a week. My door was never locked. The Colonel seemed to calm down a bit. The bravado was gone. He spent more time on the golf course, sometimes playing 2 rounds a day. We didn't talk much anymore. His circle of friends seemed to get smaller and smaller each week. About 6 months after our Parcheesi game, Henry Barton died of a heart attack while playing golf in Bermuda. 2 buses brought us to Colonel Barton's military funeral at Indiantown Gap. I tried to remain inconspicuous. Grace sat in the front with her 2 sons and daughter. The sons seemed to be as arrogant as their father. The daughter looked like she had a broomstick shoved up her ass and sucked lemons for breakfast. It was sad to see such an elegant lady have such awful kids. I was thankful I didn't have the same problem. Henry Barton's sons wasted no time loading his collectibles into their cars. The daughter seemed to have no interest in any of these things. She spent all her time with Grace. I only had to watch from afar. That evening, Grace did not come to the dining room. When I heard a knock on the door, I knew immediately that it wasn't my mistress. She was already used to just walking in. The lemon-sucking, brown-haired woman stood there, not smiling. "Walter Graham, I'm Nora Barton, Grace's daughter. May I have a moment of your time?" I was afraid to tell her no. "I'm trying to get my mother's affairs in order before I go home. There are a few things left to take care of." "Would you like a beer?" I was taken aback when she nodded yes, and even more so when she started drinking from the bottle. "My money-hungry brothers have left with their loot, and I'm left to clean up the mess. I have one small problem to solve before I can leave." She swallowed half her beer in one gulp. "I don't see how I can be of any use. My mother craves the companionship she's been deprived of for years. I understand you are ready and willing to offer her what she needs, and I would like to pay you for your services." "Why on earth would you want to pay me for something I'm willing to do for free?" She finished her beer with a second sip. "I feel obligated to protect the inheritance. My father left a lot of money. It's a life annuity for my mother with the provision that it be passed equally to each of the children upon her death. I don't want Grace's money. I don't need it, and I don't see any reason to separate us." "I don't want to separate you. In fact, I want you to move in with her. The board says it's okay, and Mom will like it." "What's the problem?" I asked, still trying to grasp the situation. "How can we keep you both from getting married? If you marry her, things could get very messy, and it would only benefit the lawyers." "What's your solution?" I inquired, sensing she had thought this through. "I want to hire you as a permanent companion for my mother. You can live together as husband and wife, but you will actually be an employee, not a husband. You'll have limited power of attorney so you can make medical decisions and such, but you won't have legal marital rights." "What kind of salary are we talking about?" I was skeptical but interested. "I'll pay your monthly dues here in Maplewood, and I'll give you an open credit card so you can entertain Mom, like going to movies, restaurants, and the like. You can use your pension for whatever you want. You can also sell your condo. As I understand it, you will get 90% of the original price when you resell it." It all seemed pretty mercantile. I guess it made sense from a financial standpoint. But for me personally, it stunk to high heaven. "I'm sorry, Nora. I appreciate your offer, but it's impossible. I love Grace, and I really want to spend the rest of my time with her. It's been difficult for me since my wife's death. I didn't think I would ever find someone to replace her. Your mother does, but I won't let our relationship be jeopardized over money. I'll gladly sign a prenup or something, but I will not be bribed under any circumstances. From what I understand, she can give the entire annuity to her kids, and we can live just fine on what I have. Well, maybe not as well, but comfortably. Would you like another beer?" "No more beer, thanks. I've got to get back to Chicago. Can I call you at the end of the week?" "I'll look forward to it. In the meantime, I know a nice lady who needs someone to hold her hand. I feel obligated, and I intend to honor that obligation until you tell me otherwise." "Do as you see fit, Mr. Graham. I think she's waiting for you." Nora didn't call back. Grace and I no longer had to hide in the shadows. We spent most nights in her apartment. We used mine from time to time just for a change. We were accepted as a couple and were comfortable in each other's company. 2 or 3 times a month, I had lunch with one of the guys. I never said anything about Grace because I didn't want them to think I was trying to replace their mother. It was easier that way. I was proud of the fact that I didn't feel any guilt toward the kids for visiting me. They had their own lives and their own families. I felt it was important not to disrupt them. Thanksgiving was approaching, and my children did not fail to invite me to Lisa's house to spend it with everyone. I wanted to spend the day with Grace, so I simply told them thanks but no thanks. Grace took a little offense at me for not coming to terms with my family and introducing her to them. At one point, she hinted that I was ashamed of her. That's when I realized I had to open up the relationship. The first call I made was to John. I never took advantage of the fact that John was a lawyer. I felt it was unseemly. I decided I had to make an exception. He was thrilled with Grace and convinced me that his sisters would be thrilled too. He, like me, thought prenups were rude, but in this case they were necessary. It only took him a few days to draw up papers completely protecting all of Grace's property from me, regardless of our relationship. That year, Christmas was spent at John's house. Grace gave me a first edition of a Mickey Spillane novel, and I gave her an engagement ring. Her acceptance into the family was unanimous. We were married in March of that year in the community room at Maplewood. Nora came to the wedding, but her brothers did not show up. I gave her a copy of the prenup, and with a wink, she handed it back to me. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, like and subscribe. Email your story to us and become part of our community. For more stories, check out the next video on my channel. Take care.